I'm going to start this one off, kind of go through a PowerPoint slide, a couple of them, just to kind of talk about the 6 ways that we can boost our engineering productivity. And then we'll be spending some time with the software and kind of showing you how the software can do that. But let's kind of start off talking about the 6 ways that Onshape enables engineering productivity, or the kind of the main tenets that you can use to increase your engineering productivity. So first, we'll talk a little bit about implementing a cloud native tool that helps prevent copy chaos. And by copy chaos, I mean, typically we have lots and lots of files. That's the way CAD works, right? We have an assembly file, we have drawing files, we have part files. Even if we have an assembly, with let's say 5 parts in it, that's really 6 files, right? There's an assembly file and then the 5 files that it reads in. And then if you have a drawing of that, that's another 5 files for drawings and an assembly drawing. So you end up with lots of files. That can be confusing from the standpoint of, do I have the best file, the latest file? Which one am I using? If I do make a change, how do I let other people know about it? Things like that. Another trend we should keep in mind is stop using emails and post-it notes for design communication. I mean, obviously we still all do that, right? Send an email, hey, I just made a change to this part, or hey, will you take a look at this, or put a post-it note on somebody's desk saying, hey, will you review this document that I created, or something like that. The downside of that, is that there's not a way of keeping all that information inside the design process, right? Inside the product development process. So those things kind of fall by the wayside. And a lot of times we're stuck looking for old emails that gives us some information, or where was that post-it note that I used to have? So keeping everything inside the design process is really important to help you fully define and see the history of how something came about to its being. So the third tenet that we'll talk about is being able to share information earlier on in the design cycle. So the quicker people can get information, the more efficient everything is. And the ability to make that information that you've created available to others and to do it easily and then have them be able to consume it easily is really important. And those are some of the things that Onshape is going to enable us to do. Another thing along the lines of cloud native tools is that they aren't really hardware dependent like your typical CAD workstation would be, where you have to spend, a lot more money on a faster CPU and more RAM and a faster disk and all of those kind of things. That's not really important when everything is running in the cloud. The only thing you need is the internet to access it, and you can just use a regular run-of-the-mill laptop or desktop or your phone or a tablet to work with Onshape, because all the computational stuff, all the RAM, everything that's being used is being used in the cloud. It's running on a server. So you're just getting images of what's you're manipulating or working with. The next thing we want to talk about is consider non-blocking data management. And by non-blocking, I mean, if I take a file and I start working on it, maybe other people can see what I'm working on, but they can't change it as well. So they have to wait until I'm done, and then they get the latest version. Even if you're in a PDM or a PLM system, the exact same thing is true. We have to check things out. Once it's checked out, only the person who checked it out can make changes to it. The other people are just stuck working with an older version of that until it gets updated. And to update it, they have to go back to the server and say, refresh my memory or refresh the part, or there's all kinds of gymnastics that you have to go through in order to keep current with things that are changing. And finally, the use of reports and dashboards and things to make information a lot easier to get at. And if you have more information, you have good information, you can certainly make better decisions. So with that, our agenda, we'll talk a little bit about bottlenecks, what they are, who suffers from them, and then we'll kind of revisit the 6 ways. But first of all, let's talk about bottlenecks. So version control confusion is an issue. If we don't have things managed, we have things on a shared drive. What is the latest version? Well, we have a folder over here that we're using, and we put all our released information in there. But if something gets changed, does it get updated all the time? Well, we hope so. We're trusting that it will. Even if we have a PDM system, version control, it will give us the latest version, but it doesn't always make sure that people have total updates of that. If you have an older version, you've downloaded on your desktop and you're working with it, basically you had checked it out at some point, checked it back in, but you still have that there where you can work on it, you're working on an old version right away. That's not a good thing. Delays due to team miscommunications. So somebody could say, did you get that message that I sent you, seeing the new version? And no, I didn't get your email, or it went into, somewhere else. So we have all kinds of issues with miscommunicating information, being able to have the latest information and be able to collaborate on it, work on it as a team, which we are in the design group and in the manufacturing group. Do we have the tools that allow us to collaborate easily and quickly? And finally, there's the thing that we have with all software, right? It crashes from time to time. So, over years, we figure out, yeah, I'm going to file all the time. Or sometimes softwares have a little thing that after every 20 minutes or 20 clicks, it saves something. And that's fine. But the thing is, you're still going to lose work, right? If something crashes. Interesting thing with Onshape, and I'm not going to say it doesn't crash. I've never seen it crash, and you won't either. The thing is that because it's running on a server, it's actually running on multiple servers. If one server goes down or something happens, it just rolls over to the next one, and it just keeps going. It's you never see anything happen, and since it's saving your data all the time, you never lose anything. Everything is saved all the time in Onshape. So let's talk a little bit about version control. It can be kind of confusing. We have a variety of designers here working, and they can exchange information um, back and forth in a number of different ways. And here, in the middle, we see Dropbox, and we say, oh yeah, we store our stuff in the cloud. And it's really not any better, right? Maybe you can access that Dropbox a little bit easier, but the thing is that you might as well still have a big shared drive, right? It's not managing the data. Or we could send things using a USB, right? And that's bad. Or email. I'm going to email this PDF to our customer. And so the minute you send that email, first of all, it's out of date, right? It's no longer going to be updating. So has a very good chance of being un, you know, uh, behind the times as far as the latest version. But also once it leaves your premises, you don't have any control over it. They can do, you have trust, right? You have trust that this isn't going to wander off. Our IP is not going to wander off somewhere else and be seen or manipulated or repurposed by somebody else. And so what we do also is we make copies. I do a save as because I want to make an iteration of this part. So I can't save it as the same name because then we have issues with naming and the RAM gets all messed up and we got to clear it. So we say save as and give it a different name, start working on that. So now we have another set of copies of files that we have to deal with. So one thing that people do is, well, let's just buy a PDM system, right? So there's another cost item that we have to purchase. It's going to behave and look differently from the software you're using, even if it's by the same company. It works differently and it just behaves differently and the interface is different. So it's a whole other thing you have to learn. But it will manage all these copies that we're generating. But the thing is that that's another overhead that we have to deal with, another install that we have to keep updated, and all those types of issues that come with a PDM system. So we'll talk a little bit also about delay in communication and issues with that. Um, Real simple graph that we've seen for many years that if you wait longer during the product development cycle to make changes, it costs more money. And that's the issue that we can have. So what we want to do is have everybody have the latest, greatest information as soon as possible. And the only way to do that is to give everybody access to the latest, greatest information. And that's one thing that we can do very, very easily with Onshape. And here we have an email saying, forget the last email that I sent you. We've made some changes. So, let's just move with my changes. Hopefully you haven't started cutting steel yet. There's something we can think about. But the thing is that if everybody has the only version, right? The only version that exists and it's always the latest version, then we can move things along quicker. We don't incur the kinds of expenses that we have by delay in being able to make decisions on things or delay in being able to do things. So this is a big benefit in the world of Onshape where everybody has access that we want to. And we'll see this when I go through my presentation of the access that they have and the type of access that they have, but it's always the latest. And the nice thing too is that the software is always updated. Everybody that has Onshape is on the same version of Onshape because they're pointing at the same thing. So, and updates happen about every 3 weeks. So we're always getting new refreshed capabilities inside the software as we're working with it. And everybody gets it at the same time. So we don't ever have any of that kind of a mismatch of different versions. Never, that goes away. Never have to worry about it. And then we'll talk a little bit about CAD crashes. We've all experienced those over the years. Lost data, had to redo it. We can redo it faster than we did the first time, but it still doesn't make it any better. We're still lost things. We've lost data. We've lost our time. We've lost lots of things when this happens. And then when we do start to save things, I'm saving it back to our shared drive. Am I overwriting somebody else's work? Is this going to screw things up? Again, we're running on faith that we're not. That's not going to happen, but it does. Did you save the right version, right? Is this going to be the current version that we're going to go forward with, or is this kind of an iteration, an offshoot of this that we might use in a side project or for a particular customer? And then one of the really important things is, do I have a backup of this? A lot of people do have backup systems, and it's kind of like a fire extinguisher. With a fire extinguisher, you got to keep checking on it, right? People come in, if it's for a company, somebody will come in and check the fire extinguisher, make sure that it works, that things are up to date, so that if something bad does happen, it's going to work. Well, a lot of times people have backups, but they never test it out. They never test to see if their backup can be recovered until something bad happens. And then it either does or it doesn't. And then you're really in trouble if it doesn't. So one of the things I could recommend to everybody is that if you do have a backup system, from time to time, do go through the process of recovering some information, on the side, maybe in a temp environment where you can make sure that the way that you back things up is recoverable. So here's some typical, quotes from people that, suffer from these issues that we've been talking about. And, we've all said a lot of these ourselves. Um, and this is kind of the things that need to be solved and can be solved by using Onshape, right? Because it overcomes the typical bottlenecks, the things that prohibit us from being efficient in the productivity process. So finally, kind of summarize, we talked about the 6 ways. Use a cloud native tool. Um, don't use emails and post-it notes when you have a capability in your software or you're in your tool to be able to capture all that information and keep it there. And then also share information earlier in the design cycle because everybody can get the latest information. You don't need the high-end software and IT support that you would typically need for on-premises software because it's in the cloud, it's all taken care of for you. Consider a data management approach where there isn't this checking in and checking out and things like that. And then finally, the ability to have reports and be able to get information quicker and easier is a definite benefit to boosting our productivity. So let's take a look at the software. I'm going to open up, here's Onshape, and what we're looking at is the home page. So a variety of different folders that I have access to. Here are some parts that I've worked on recently. This particular part here, if I wanted to find out more information about it without having to open it, I can just go over to this little information button over here, and it tells me about this particular product that I have here. And so this is more of the PDM side of Onshape, where it's telling me when it was created by, when it was last modified. It can have a variety of other non-graphic type of information about this particular part. If I wanted to know a little bit about its history or kind of how it was put together, I can click on this button right here. And what this is going to show me is here's kind of the history of the part. It started here, and right now we're currently up in this area. But one of the unique things about Onshape is that you can do this thing called branching. So it'd be akin to doing a save as, but a save as is totally separate, right? It's totally devoid and separated from the original. This is when we do a branch, it's still connected to the original, but we can do whatever we want in the branch and it won't affect the parent side. And if we do develop something that we do like, we can just merge it back in. So in this example that we're looking at here, there's a bunch of different ideas. We're iterating on different ways to combine these two parts in this assembly. And there can be lots of different ways. You know, we can weld it, we can bolt it, we can slide it in, there's add screws, lots of different ways. And then we can pick the best or the combinations of ideas to do the best thing. And this is just one example. But what it is everything is captured in here. We might not use some of these ideas. We might not use any of them. But the thing is that they're all connected in here. They're all part of this. And when I call up this particular design, I have access to all of this throughout its history. And we can maybe go back at some particular point and say, you know, this welding idea was a really good idea. Let's revert back to that and start using that going forward. So lots of really nice capabilities in Onshape to avoid this copy syndrome of having all these different variations of things all over the place. And Onshape doesn't have files. I mean, you can make a file. You could say, save this as a step file, save this as a PDF file. But in and of itself, Onshape doesn't have any files. There is no extension for an Onshape piece of information, right? It's a database. So let's kind of look at our theme part here. I'm going to look at this camera mount. So this camera mount is an assembly that we have, and it's basically holding a camera on top on these rails, and this fits on top of a robot, right? So it helps people view things. But what we want to do is kind of take a look at this in a variety of different ways of how Onshape can help us in the development of this product without all the typical hassles that we have in your run-of-the-mill CAD system or PDM system. So first of all, we can take a look at our assembly here. And we can see over on the left side, right, are all the different components of this assembly. Across the top are different ways of putting other parts together or putting these parts together. So this particular one articulates. So I can kind of articulate the camera as it's as needed. So in this particular case as well, if we look over here, you'll notice that a couple of these parts have little symbols next to them. And what this means is these particular sub-assemblies, so we can see when I hover over these, they're highlighting these two sub-assemblies here. It's the same one, but it's assembled in twice. But this triangle means that it's been released. So we're using a released product here, which is kind of interesting. So we get feedback if this is a released product. We also would get feedback if there's a newer version of a particular part. So if we picked, you know, maybe this bracket right here, if there's a newer version, they would put a little symbol next to it saying, there's a newer version, do you want to use it? And maybe we do, and maybe we don't. It won't automatically update to the latest because we might not want the latest. It gives you an opportunity to check out the latest and then either use it or not. So maybe for one customer, we're using this kind of bracket. For another one, we're using something else, maybe without the hole in it or something like that. Very nice way of giving people information about the information they're working with. If we were going to change one of these sub-assemblies, if we kind of take a look at it, you can see there's a series of bolts holding it together and things like that. But what if we wanted to move one of these bolts or add another hole in here for kind of retrofit this for maybe another design? Well, since this is released, it's probably being used elsewhere. So I can find that out very easily. I can come over here and just say where used. Where is this subassembly being used? And it gives me information here. It's being used in another subassembly. It's actually showing me here. It's being used in this kind of fixture assembly, both in version 1 and version 2 of this. It's also used in its own subassembly and its own drawing. And then it's also used in another assembly, which is a prototype, the original prototype of this. So we can get all kinds of information about this. This is very PDM-ish, right? This isn't your typical CAD system that does something like this. And this can tell us what parts and what other assemblies and drawings are using this. So if I do make a change, it potentially can affect those. So let's move on. This particular component, I'm going to have to make some changes to it. We're going to put a different camera on here, so I have to make some modifications to this. But I also want to highlight something else that makes this software very unique, is that I can share this software or this design that I have with other people. So here we can see that I already have this shared with Ryan, who's part of our company. You met him earlier today in the introduction, but you notice that I have him as viewing capability, right? So he can't change any geometry, but he can look at it, he can keep up to date with what I'm doing. We can communicate back and forth. What I might, and there's all different ways of inviting people into this. So I can invite teams of people. Let's invite the manufacturing guys. Let's invite marketing guys. Individual guests, I can just send a link to somebody. Somebody who doesn't even have Onshape, I can send them a link and they can access and see this data that I have without having a license. But in this case, I'm going to say, let's grab an individual. Let's share it with another guy in our company called Nick. And with Nick, I'm going to say, I don't want him to be able to export this. I don't want this design wandering off anywhere, but he can make a copy of it. I guess that's fine. He can share it with other people inside the company, but that's about it. So I'm going to share that with Nick. So you notice that we have Nick up here, and now he has access to this. So I'm going to pop Nick up just for a second here. I have him logged in. So this is his current view, but he would get an email with a hyperlink in it saying, Bill has invited you to work on this product. And he clicks on it and he brings him to here. But I'm just going to refresh to see what he would see. You notice now he has access to our camera mount here. So he can select on this and he can see the same data that we're working on. So here's our same camera mount. This is the same product. So let me take Nick. We're going to kind of minimize him for a second. And I want to make a change to this. As I mentioned before, we need to make a change to this. So I'm going to, while I'm here in the assembly, I'm just going to say, let's go and take this particular guy. And what we're going to do is do something called edit in context. So let's just change him for the way he is and make it so it'll work with the camera. So I'm going to say, let's sketch on there. And let's just make a simple cutout. So I'm just going to cut a notch in this, maybe about like that. I'll make it maybe 1.75. And let's dimension it from one of the holes so we can kind of control where this is. And maybe make that a 1/2 inch. So it's a parametric modeler that we're dealing with. This will be our cutout. So I'll say this is good. And then kind of take this and say, let's take that sketch. We're going to extrude it out. We want it to really remove material. And we could say go through the whole part. And I could say, okay. I could say now that I've done that, let's go back to our design. We can see that the other one, right, this is assembled in twice. We can see that as well. If Nick goes back and calls it up, he sees the exact same thing, right? We're working on the exact same part at the exact same time. In fact, you can see Nick comes over and says, oh, I'm going to go take a look at the drawing. So he clicks over here, and this is the assembly drawing. And there's a little message up here that says this needs to be updated. So we'll click that. And what we're going to see is this part being updated with the notches in it. So Nick has updated that drawing. And if I kind of move over here, looking at me, I can see where Nick is. Nick is in the drawing. See his face is down there? If he goes over and goes back into the block assembly, see how it's switched over? So he can see where I am in this design. I can see where he is. We can be in the exact same assembly working on it at the same time. That's what gives us the productivity. I mean, you do the same thing in manufacturing, right? If they need to get something out the door, they kind of swarm the product and everybody works on it at the same time. Engineering can't, right? Because of the software that they use and the limitations that it has, they can't do it. But now with Onshape, you can. Let's minimize Nick for a second. I did share that with him. I'm going to go over and say, let's give him a comment because I really need him. If we look at our assembly over here, you'll notice that we have our little support over here along with some nuts and bolts, but we don't have it on the other side. I need Nick to kind of do that. Here's, we have some ongoing communications between people. You can see that we can send images back and forth or markups or things like that, not just texting. And this is all built in as part of Onshape. I'm going to go in right now and say, let's add another message, and I can say, let's send it specifically to Nick. And we'll just say, can you finish the design? And I know he's going to ask, what are you talking about? So I'm just going to say, let's do a markup real quickly. I'm just going to say, let's take, let's take this guy. Let's kind of make a red line here and kind of point at it. And I don't know, maybe put an arrow there. That's probably better. And let's put one over there. All right, so there's my markup. So now I can go and say, send that to Nick. So if we pop up Nick, we can see he gets that markup, right? So I've sent him that and he can see it. He can open it up full size if he wants to, but okay, he understands what he needs to do. So let's be Nick for a little while. So he's going to go over to the assembly and start to work with it. So he has to assemble in this other component here. So we'll see a little bit about how assemblies work in Onshape. So we can kind of browse down here and find the part that we need. We'll just place it over here. And so now we can start using these different commands up here. Onshape uses something called mates, which are, I think of them as little coordinate systems, but they're flavored to do particular tasks. So we have one that just kind of welds things together, another one that uses a revolute joint or planar joints, or a variety of different things if we wanted to kind of have it articulate. So I'm going to say, let's line that up with, kind of zoom in back here with there. So now just placing it one time, one click, usually you'd have to do 2 or 3 degrees of freedom to kind of get that lined up, but now it's easily assembled in. He can look over here, taking a look at the other side. There's a bunch of nuts and bolts I got to put in. I could go and look it up, go to the library and do things like that. But we can also do something called replicate. And we'll just say, let's take one of these screws, since it's the same on that side as this side, and I'll say, let's match it to this face right here. And it puts all of them in for me. So very, very quickly, Nick was able to assemble in another part, add all the bolts, and it took, what, 20 seconds, something like that. And then he can send me a message back, because we don't have to be co-located. That's the nice thing about being cloud-based. We could be in different states, different countries. He could be at home, with the way things are. A lot of people are working from home lately, but he makes the updates to that. I'm going to come over, take a look. I can automatically, obviously, I see that because he's working on the same thing that I am. I want to go back to the assembly drawing. We'll take a look at the assembly drawing, and what that's going to say is you need to update it because we've added some other parts in here. So I'm just going to say update our assembly drawing. We'll see, well, the bill of material did change. It probably should have zoomed in on it so you could see that, but now we have more components. So here's our BOM. We can see the different components. You'll notice that one subassembly, there's 2 of those, but it currently is released. The other parts are still in progress, right? So there's still kind of work in process. One of the things that we could do now is, now that we have this set up, now it's ready to be released. So as we looked at the history before on this part, we can see that there's a previous version here that we started out with, but what I want to do is release this. So I can just take this drawing and right mouse button and say I want to release this. And we can use the standard out of the box workflow that's there, and everybody does get that using the professional or the enterprise licensing. But you can also, if you have the enterprise version, you can make different workflows if you want. So this is where I have a drop down. I could use a different workflow, but in this case, we'll use the one out of the box. And so what it does is it grabs all the components and it says, here they are. Now the assembly, that sub-assembly, remember he was already released, shows us that, and it shows us his part number. So there's also part numbering, automatic part numbering in the system. And so we're going to take all of this and say, yes, let's update all of this. Let's generate part numbers for all these guys. And then we can call this particular one, I'm just going to kind of copy this. And we could just say that this is ECN dash, whatever the name of the drawing is. And approvers, we could do that. Maybe observers, I could say let's include Ryan just so he gets an update on what's going on. I'm going to be the approver just to get this over, but I could give it to a number of people that could okay this, but I'm just going to say let's release this. So you see a message at the top. Ryan gets an email because he's an observer, so he gets an email saying that this has been updated. You'll notice in the history, now we have this little triangle. As opposed to a version, this is a revision. This is actually a release. And this part is released. If we look up in the revision block up here, it's also telling us that it's been released by me. So one thing that we can check on, I'll kind of minimize this. We'll go back to our assembly here for a second, is we can take a look. Remember, we made a change to this part. And I'm just going to kind of wrap things up real quickly here. We can take a look at the part here. And remember, there were two different versions of it. There's the version, the little notched out version that we have, and this one. So I could say, let's compare those. Let's look at, and I can pick any moment in time and compare it to any other moment in time. But here I'm just saying, compare version 1 to our final version. It says, here's the way that it looks now, but way it used to look was like this. And it's showing me what features are different, right? There was a sketch. Remember, I made that sketch. We can see it highlighted right there. And then there was the extruder, the cutout that I made. But we can see very easily, how parts have evolved over time and at any moment in time, which is incredibly powerful. So we can find out exactly how we got there and when we did it. We can even find out who did it. But the important thing here is that Onshape gives us a lot of capabilities to communicate, to make decisions with the right information, and it speeds the whole product development process along quicker than your typical CAD plus PDM system that most people are using today. It's a totally different way of thinking about things, but it's a lot better way. It's a lot more efficient, and it's actually a lot more fun too, believe it or not.